Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Good evening and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a wonderful festival of lights, birth, and renewal, no matter what you believe in or what you celebrate. This is a joyous, blessed time of rebirth and renewal indeed, not just for humans, but also for the planet. We're coming to you today on December 25, so thanks for being with us during this magic time. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. And speaking of magic and holiday spirits, tonight, let me take you on a discovery tour as to why these days, from December 21st, with the winter solstice, to the following 7 to 12 days, depending on what you believe, are so filled with joy, hopes, and blessings. Celebrated by many cultures across time and space around the world since the beginning of humankind. December 24-25 are not just about Christmas, you see. In fact, Christianity has borrowed most of these elements from pagan beliefs, which in turn go back to universal knowledge and divine principles that are anchored in humankind as well as the planet as long as we've existed. A pine tree, for example, during these days has been practiced already by the ancient Egyptians, who understood that the pine cone represents the same shape as your pineal gland, the third eye. Pine trees are evergreens, representing the eternity of the soul and the eternity of life. That's just one example. There's also the origin of the tradition of Santa Claus and why he's wearing a red and white suit, for example. That one goes back to Siberia and the fly-agrarian mushroom, which is red, has a white stem, and white dots. In all those celebrations, winter solstice plays a key role, the actual marking of the core of what is today celebrated as Christmas, representing the opportunity for birth and renewal for everyone. Now, for Christians, the birth of Jesus, in an allegorical sense, represents the rebirth of life in a physical sense. For people with more inner Christian knowledge, Christmas marks the time of spiritual evolution, rebirth of the divine spark within that invites us to transcend beyond and understand how indeed we are immortal. The immortality part is what Easter is about, but the birth of it is what Christmas is about. It's the theme of rebirth and renewal. It's uniting an ever-present message of the winter solstice event as it is understood by pagans, druids, and ancient cultures. In a physical sense, it's also shown on Earth. Winter solstice is the shortest day, longest night in the northern hemisphere, and the longest day, shortest night in the southern hemisphere. That happens because Earth, as it moves around the sun, is tilted. And when it's tilted away from the sun, it's winter. And when it's tilted towards the sun, we experience it as summer. It represents two halves, which when you think about it, make a whole. Two principles, cold and dark, and warm and light. Mm-hmm. So we live in America, and I wanted to know the meaning of solstice for people who have been always close to nature and earth cycles, Native Americans. So joining me tonight is Gerald Auger, an actor and spiritual leader of Woodland Cree descent, who's going to take us to Native American traditions and celebrations for winter solstice, as well as what Native Americans foretell during these times we're in. Welcome, Gerald, on Smart Sustainability. Great to have you on.
How? Nista pita ni gan mamak tawina og simanto na naskumao. Igual mo mano kabi we go siya pesi desku matchu moktion.
So, Gerald, we talked a little bit about winter solstice. I know this is a big theme for you as well. What does it represent to you, and why is it a big day?
Thank you, Nicolette. And I spoke in my Woodland Cree language when I first started addressing our topic today, because I've been told by my ancestors and my elders to always honor the Woodland Cree, the indigenous component of who I am as a human being. And in that acknowledgement, I said, and I thank Creator first and foremost for allowing me to be here today. And I thank each and every one of you that are here listening in. And please forgive me for how I'm about to make you feel, but I love you. So for me, when it comes to the time of Christmas that the Gregorian calendar acknowledges, I haven't followed the Gregorian calendar for years, and for me, this time of the year is the fourth and final quadrant of this lunar year. And it being the fourth and final quadrant being December the 21st to March the 21st is where it's a time of reflection, a time of renewal, a time for me to look at what I need to do for the next lunar year. And we talk about it being the shortest day in the northern hemisphere and it being the longest day in the southern hemisphere. That is what we see as what we know as natural law. When something goes up, something must come down. Where there's hot, there's cold. Where there's night, there's day. Where there's male, there's female. And that's just a part of balance and understanding what balance, in order for us to walk and live in balance in this day and age, even since the beginning of time, we need to understand what these laws, that the one that I know as my best friend, which is the Creator, is understanding Creator's law, understanding natural law, understanding the laws of nature, and then spiritual law. And that because these are laws that humanity has forgotten. And then fortunately, there are some religions, some faiths who don't understand or are willing to acknowledge that they are following a lot of our pagan values and beliefs, right? So,
well, for many people, Christmas, and I've learned that actually as I have lived here in America, I think for a lot of people, the Christmas tradition is also something that's familiar with them, so they understand it's part of their day-to-day life. Very few have actually looked beyond and see where does it come from and how far does the tradition actually go back, because it does borrow from a lot of pagan beliefs, which are universal beliefs about the balance, about the rebirth, right?
Yeah, see, and for me, that's the beautiful thing about it's a time of family, it's a time for community to come together. That is the one beautiful thing about this time throughout Mother Earth, is the whole world is wanting to be coming from a place of love, light, and unity and peace and happiness. And that's the beautiful thing that I love about this time, is that at least the world is wanting to operate from that or come from that place of love and light, unity and healing and love and peace, right? So that's the beautiful thing about this time of the year and how the world celebrates that part of that Gregorian calendar, right? So yeah, no, I love it.
So okay, so I have a question on this. Because when you think about, and you just brought this up, there is a contrast. So on Christmas, at Christmas time in the northern hemisphere, it's cold and it's snowy and it's dark and there are no leaves usually. Well, the snow has kind of been left out in the last few years, but generally, I mean, it's cold, it's dark, it's a time to be cozy with family and silent, and then. But then it's a festival of light and warmth in a way. So it's contrasting the outer world with the inner world. How does this fit into the overall evolution of December as the winter solstice and then becoming really this festival of light?
I guess for me, when it comes, it comes down to natural law. It comes down to balance. And that for last night, for the first time in a few years actually, I was able to sit in silence with myself and had to look at the four quadrants of who I am as a human being the emotional, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. And then I had to look at what I was willing to embrace as I go into this next lunar year, and to what I was prepared to let go of. And meaning that there's things I'm willing that I am going to embrace emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. That's going to be good for me, and things that I will release emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually that are not good for me. And
Yeah.
that because it's really this time of that's the light part. When I talk about, for me, when I talk about light, when what I'm willing to embrace for myself as a human being, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, that's the light part of myself, of who I am as a spiritual being housed in this human being. And what I'm releasing is the shadow self of me. If there's any anger, if there's any resentment, if there's anything that's not good for me that I'm holding on to, I'm willing to let that go. That's the shadow self of my part of my human being, right? So that's kind of what I've done last night for the solstice. Was I've embraced the light part of who I am as a human being, and I'm releasing the part of the shadow self. If there's any unhealthy ego, if there's any unresolved anger, any unresolved resentment that I'm still carrying, that's part of it, right? For me. So, and that's what for me the solstice was. As I'm speaking as a woodland Cree, when I talk about my Native American brothers and sisters on Turtle Island, to even here in Canada, to my red brothers and sisters in New Zealand, to Australia. You know, we have our own way. We all have distinctive values, beliefs, and ceremonies. But no one ceremony is identical to the next. And but we do have universal spiritual values and beliefs, and that's being stewards of Mother Earth,
Yeah.
honoring our higher power and honoring those elements and creation itself, right?
Yeah. So two questions for you. What is a lunar year? You've referred to the lunar year for you already like twice. What is that?
For me, the lunar year is I follow what my ancestors have always followed prior to European contact here on Turtle Island. That is the 1328 frequency. That's what I've come to know when I spent 6 years in the wilderness as natural time, as real time. And there's only one species that lives that 1328 frequency, and that's a full moon every 28 days, 13 times of the year. That is what I know as real time. But the world is living what the world knows as the 1260 frequency.
Yeah.
And that is 60 seconds to 1 minute, 60 minutes to an hour, 12 months of the year. That's artificial time. That's a clock and a calendar that you will never catch up to. But people are chasing this clock and this calendar. In the process, they're getting stressed out. They're getting cancer. They're getting sick, and they're going off balance. So that's what for me for the lunar year is. This being a fourth and final quadrant, being December the 21st to March the 21st. Yeah. Then the first quadrant in the next lunar year is the spring solstice, March the 21st to June the 21st. That's the first quadrant. Yeah. The second quadrant goes from June the 21st to September the 21st. That's the second. And the third quadrant is September the 21st to December the 21st. And the fourth and final quadrant is December the 21st to March the 1st again. That's a whole cycle. That's gone full circle.
So do you focus, like, is there a specific focus or emphasis on what is generally suggested to focus on during the various quadrants?
Yes, for me, it's just, that's kind of why when I look at the emotional, the mental, the physical, the spiritual part of my being, in those lunar years, I look at that. So last year, for instance, for me, from March the 21st to June the 21st was the time I had to look at myself. What am I prepared to do to better myself as a human being, to make the world a better place? What am I willing to look at emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually? And then I look at that in that quadrant. And then from March the 21st to June the 21st, I look at, okay, this is what I need to start making that conscious choice to start working towards that change, that balance that I need for myself in the second quadrant. The third quadrant then is from June the 21st to September 21st, is making that actual change, making those, doing what I said I'm going to do for myself. So I can then start reflecting again from September the 21st to December the 21st, the fourth and final quadrant. So it's called, for me, it's evolving as a spiritual being housed in this human being.
Yeah.
But just like right now with what 2023 is going to bring, for those of us who've been fighting the good fight, for those of us who've been walking towards the light, working for the light, doing it for the light, we're going to have abundance and prosperity. For those who have been lazy or haven't been mindful, who have been selfish in their own way and not honoring this new world that's emerging, they are going to see, and unfortunately, be visited by natural law like they've never been.
I want to talk for a moment a little bit more about tradition before we focus on 2023 and the actual, the importance of 2023 being a 7 year, so to speak. So when you mentioned before that you're among the Woodland Cree, for example, you all have different traditions. Is there something that you all share during that time? I mean, other than the spiritual belief of birth and rebirth, but are there, for example, can you give us some examples of how Native Americans look at this time? Are there certain elements, like, or some that focus, for example, or honor particular animals more, or plants or species more during that time, or specifically during that time because they represent something, or anything along those lines?
Well, there are certain ceremonies that we do, and certain spiritual practices, and certain customs and traditions that we are only allowed to do certain in those 4 seasons of spring, summer, fall, and winter. Our ceremonies there are different ceremonies for different seasons, and different medicines that we can pick in different times of those seasons as well, right? So it's all connected.
So medicines also, so certain medicines you also, there are some medicines you would only pick during the winter time, and then some only during the springtime, or how?
The medicine people that I work with, one of them will pick certain medicines in June, and some in the fall as well, and so that's a part of it. It's all a part of the cycle of life that we know as 4-directional human beings, meaning that everything we do, the number 4 is very significant for us, as is the number 7. As is the number 13, right? So
4 being the foundation. Absolutely. So in terms of, can you give us, like, what's a typical ritual for that you know of, for example, that's been practiced only during this time of the year?
Well, there's certain offerings that we do, like a certain ceremony that we can do only in the winter, in the solstice. But that ceremony is connected to rebirth. It's connected to renewal at the same time, right? So, because for Mother Earth in this northern hemisphere, she's resting now. As she rests, then there are certain sicknesses that get extinguished in this time because of the weather, it being cold and certain. So that's a part of it. That's really some of the things that are happening for us. And the solstice, again, it's a time of reflection and a time of renewal. And what are we willing to embrace, and what are we willing to let go, right? So
now, we talked before we started the show a little bit about renewal, and we talked also about what that means for the planet, for planet Earth, for Mother Earth. There is a time of renewal. What can you share with us on that?
In times of can you?
Yeah, the planet Earth. So renewal is in what way is Earth renewing during this time as well? Can we? How would you explain that?
How would I explain the time of renewal for Mother Earth in this time? In the northern hemisphere anyway, but because traditionally this is where again she would rest to regenerate herself. So when the spring solstice would happen, that's when it would be a time of regrowth for the medicines, and the animals are going through their own cycle as well at the same time. So that's and the elements are, of course, the element of fire and heat is, it's the element of air is more prevalent in this time for Mother Earth, for this northern hemisphere, right? Because these elements, the earth, the wind, the water, the fire, they all have a role to play in the circle of life. But now, because the world is starting to manipulate the weather, it's now creating chaos, because when you disrupt the natural order of life, the natural order of nature, there's going to be consequence, right? So
let's talk about this control of the weather, because I think that's actually a big theme. Because humans, they always dream, and you hear this a lot with this whole idea of climate change, and for some reason humans want to take the lead, so to speak, and start controlling the weather because they're so afraid of climate change, etc. Explain to us actually why this is completely off, and I think we are barking up on a wrong tree, because there is a natural cycle. And once you interfere on one thing, it throws everything else out, right? So talk to us about where you see the danger in all of this, and then how this might affect us.
Well, unfortunately, it is already affecting the people. Unfortunately, like what happened in Asia, they had a 70-day drought. And that they've never had that before, and that because there's consequence when you start playing with the weather patterns and start manipulating the weather part, the element of the air as well. And then even there in the U.S., the Mississippi River is drying up, the Euphrates River is drying up, and these earthquakes are happening here in Alberta. They had an earthquake in northern Alberta. That's not supposed to happen. That's never been there, right? Because when you start playing with those elements and the natural order of things, there is going to be consequence. You can't play God and expect to have no consequence, right? So that's a part of it, and that's again the ego that's the world is operating for, unfortunately, by, right? So so you can't play with those elements and not expect consequence, because if that was the case, then we wouldn't have the need for natural law. That's why these laws exist: creator's law, natural law, the laws of nature, spiritual law. They're there for a reason. So
I actually heard that, interestingly enough, we usually always think that during winter, that's the time when nature rests, because it's dark, it's dry, there are no leaves, etc. But also in nature itself, there is a lot of activity going on among the seeds, among plants, etc., to prepare them for actually growth in spring, which I thought was really, really interesting, because it was not something I had heard of before, but it makes complete sense. And if you actually listen to the chatter of the trees, the roots, etc., you can pick up that there is activity in there.
Well, see, and that was the thing. It's funny that you mentioned that, Nicolette, because I think it was in the fall, I live in an urban center, and I was looking at all these people raking up all these leaves, because the world expects you to have, everything has to have its place, has to be nice and clean. But as soon as you start raking up those leaves, you are taking away an element that there are ones that crawl on Mother Earth that need those leaves as a form for them to survive what's happening in the winter, right? And they actually thrive from that. But you take that away for the insects, the ones that crawl and everything like that, then there's going to be consequence for that. And they're wondering why certain species are starting to become extinct, because we're playing with their natural habitat. And all because what? So you can have a nice looking lawn, but then you're
or your neighbors don't
these
complain.
Exactly. That's a part of it. That's how we lived prior to European contact. Everything had its place. Everything had its place in life, and it was created for a reason. But we start coming to play the role of God or whoever it is your higher power is, then you're just you're poking the bear.
Yeah, and that actually is a really, really important point, because I remember that I had neighbors with whom I had constant fights over not, raking up the leaves, etc., because I always felt that this is a natural thing of Earth and you leave them on because Earth needs it. So the animals need it, Earth needs it, you don't have to rake it all off the ground and make it spotless. But there were, the neighbors would constantly complain about this. So in our tidy linear way of thinking, for us to actually move away and let leaves be leaves on the ground and see it as something that is a positive, purposeful activity that nature has a reason for, we don't even come to think about that, because in most cases it's just like, oh, you need to rake up the leaves, and it becomes like a burden because people feel that they have to pick it up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's like the element of snow. That's snow is the element of water that needs, when it melts in the spring, it's going to give that growth to the plants, to Mother Earth, to the land, right?
Yeah.
But when people say when it snows, oh man, it's snowing a while. Oh yeah, so you're not thankful for that element. It's a part of the cycle of life, right? So it's those little things that the world has forgotten. There's a reason why it snows. There's a reason why it rains. There's a reason why even we had controlled fire. We controlled the element of fire through on the land, so we had controlled fire burns, right? That we had to do that because we were honoring Mother Earth through that element of fire. As four-directional human beings, we had our own way. We had our own way of life and how we honored those elements, right?
Okay, wait a minute. When you say we honor Mother Earth through the element of fire, elaborate on that, please. Can you explain on that?
Well, look at what happened here in BC. They had all these fires that are happening in BC, but the Indigenous were telling the governments that no, we actually burn controlled fire earlier in the I think it was in the fall. So when the spring would happen, they would have controlled fire burns. So this way it would take care of all the brush that was drying up, and so this way the fires wouldn't happen in the summer, right? So that's controlled fire. That's what they did, but they wouldn't listen, and then it was only unfortunately when that happened that the governments were realizing, well, we should have listened to what the Indigenous people were telling us, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Now, birth and rebirth and renewal are major themes during the holidays, no matter what belief you're in or what faith group you're in. It's really, the universal thing is about birth and rebirth. And when you look at how even ancient cultures have celebrated that time, and I did actually go on a little tour, so I want to take you along here for a moment to just give you some examples of how people celebrated that. So you have, for example, as I alluded to, so the Egyptians, they celebrated Christmas with a pine tree, reminding us of the evergreen, the eternal life, and the pineal gland, which is the third eye, which means we can aspire to actually having greater sight than just with our physical eyes. The Romans celebrated a whole week. They called it Saturnalia, which lasted literally 7 full days, and it was named after god Saturn, which at the time in Roman culture was the god of agriculture. And the celebrations there were quite different. They were more like Mardi Gras, so people would go and celebrate. Slaves were given more freedoms than usual. Moral restrictions were dropped, which I kind of thought that was interesting, but it was a way of celebrating. You had the Welsh people, for example, they celebrated Alban Arthen, meaning lights of winter, which is a Druid tradition, a time of death and rebirth. In Ireland, Newgrange, that's a very famous site one can visit. It dates back 3200 BC. That is associated with that festival. You have in Chinese culture the Dongzi, which celebrates the extremes of winter, and they celebrate the apex of yin, the principle of cold and stillness, and then the yang making the return of warmth and light. Then, of course, Stonehenge is the most famous one, I guess, in the Western world. It celebrates winter solstice based on the Druids. And I think in Canada, I read there's also a lantern festival in Granville Island and certain neighborhoods where people actually celebrate winter solstice. So when we talk about birth and renewal, Gerald, in what way would you say are we actually talking about rebirth? How do you see it?
Rebirth, because as we go on this physical journey that we call life, as we are evolving as spiritual beings housed in this human being, this whole human experience is to be able to, so you can work towards finding emotional, mental, physical, spiritual balance. But in order for you to continue evolving, you have to constantly, the part of you has to die in order for another part of you to live. It's like the evolution that the Mother Earth goes through. It's the evolution of life, the cycles of life, right? So I die every day for another part of me to live, because I'm always being mindful of my surroundings, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. And that because I want to be able to understand really what is my purpose, what is my role, what is the agreement I made with my creator to be born in this time, to be able to bring that guidance, that direction, that healing that's needed for the world, right? So for me, it's rebirth. A time of rebirth is where, you're looking at life from a different perspective. And for me, the 6 years in the wilderness I went into the wilderness looking at life through my physical eyes. The 6 years I was out there, I came out by looking at the world through my heart, and that and understanding that's where the creator sits and where life begins for us, right? So I died multiple times in the wilderness and was reborn multiple times as well in the wilderness, right?
So give us an example, Gerald, of when you said you see the world with your heart. And I know we refer to that a lot, and some would say it sounds like a cliche, but what is the actual difference when you see it with the heart?
Well, for me, when I see a homeless person on the street, or somebody struggling with addiction, I don't judge them, condemn them, and persecute them for where they're at in their life. They're there in that part of their life for a reason. Something they have gone through that didn't work out for them or affected them, either emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. So instead of judging them and judging a book by its cover, I take the time to see, well, what is it that's happened to you in life? What is it that I can do to help you find what you need emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, in balance, right? So that was the thing with the whole Hollywood thing, was that people were, if you didn't know the right people or did the right projects, then your value was not where was below. And I could never understand why they would think like that. So for me, when I look at life when I look at the world through my heart, not my eyes, I look at life with using my left brain, because that's where what sits on the left part of your body is your heart. That's where compassion is for me, right? I'm not a linear thinker where I don't use logic when I look at life. I'm looking at life through my heart, because I'm there to help my fellow human I'm there to help my fellow human being to the best of my abilities, and that knowing that they are struggling, knowing that they have lost their way, but I still have to find compassion for them, right? Because I've been there myself in my own way, and that's why I had to walk into the wilderness, was to be able to heal from all of that, right?
So when you talk about seeing the world through the heart, I guess one could also say seeing the world through the lens of the creator at that time, right? Because you see it differently. And some would argue or say that Christmas, or the time of birth or renewal, is really also a lot about the human, the human as an animal we feel like an animal on two legs. So the grosser part of the human being basically dies or gets left behind or shut off, so you can focus more on the higher sense of a human being, which means more the divine purpose, the spiritual, the divine gifts, also the really being connected and learning who we really are, right?
Well, see, so that for me, when I talk about the understanding, that connection to my higher power being my creator, And I understand when I was not living in balance emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually, I was shown by the Creator, showed me, said, if you don't find that balance in your life and keep living this life of where I was abusing life and what life had given me, and through illegal substances or alcohol, whatever it may be, right? Broken friendships, broken relationships, and was realizing that Creator said, if you don't turn your life to where it needs to be, eternity is going to be a long time to get it wrong. And I was shown where it was not fire, it was not hell and brimstone. It was a very dark place where I could hear people screaming, people in pain, and it was constant. And at that time, I was not living a balanced life because I had gone through trauma as a child, and I was running and numbing from it. And Creator showed me that if you don't do this to turn your life, this is where you're going to end up for an eternity. And that was when I was 16 years of age, when I was first shown eternity. And I was just shown eternity probably about a month ago. About Creator showed me the beginning and the end of life in a nanosecond. I got to see all the unhealthy patterns and behaviors I had inflicted upon myself, but also then showed me in the other half of that nanosecond what eternity looks like of love, light, and compassion. So I asked, so I asked, well, why are you showing me eternity now? What it is, where the Creator said, because you have earned that seat in the spirit world when you're done here, because you are earning a good death for yourself, because you've done the work I've asked you to do on yourself to help your fellow human being. And that's just how powerful the Creator, if the Creator can show you the beginning and the end in a nanosecond, and it still, it just amazes me what that is, right? So
now, balance, Gerald, for Native Americans, I think balance is this always been something that has been ingrained in your culture from the very beginning, from when you're little kids, or even orally transmitted? Why?
Yes, because we were taught, even when the mother was carrying the child, she would sing to that child, she would tell stories to that child, she would start teaching that child even before they were born, because they had that connection, right? But then as we go through the stages in life, we were taught what they call the rites of passage for as boys and as girls, as we matured into young men and young women to adulthood. We had rites of passage that we had certain roles and responsibilities that we had as children, as young people, as adults, and even as elders. But we were taught these rites of passage on how to govern our words and our actions, right? That's how we were able to live in balance as a human being on Turtle Island. It was unfortunately until the European came and brought that book that they called the Bible that we were disconnected from our language, from our way of life, from our land, and to that connection. And it's a beautiful thing that's happening right now is my people are going back to understanding the true power of the language, the ceremonies, the culture, and the spirituality, because certain religions have demonized a lot of our ceremonies, and my own people are still have bought into that still to this day and age. And it being Christmas today, it's quite interesting that we're doing this now, and that's how I know the Creator has a sense of humor. And this is a part of why it had to happen today, on the day that Jesus was born, that I know as Yeshua. So.
Yeah, and actually, you brought up a really important topic, and I was going to ask you about this because I wanted to ask you how Native Americans would see Christmas or the Christmas tradition. Do they see it as something that, okay, some people celebrate, or do they see it more from an angle of pain, as you just brought up, of basically stripping many Indigenous people of their own beliefs and celebrations and traditions? So where does this all fit in, or is there room for both?
I guess for me it was just, I remember asking this elder one time, and her name was Ada Deer, and she was there from the U.S. and I asked her about the concept of did we have heaven and hell, and This elder told me, he said, no, we never had, the European brought the concept of heaven and hell. And that the only heaven we knew was how we treated ourselves and our fellow human being with love, kindness, and compassion. That was the heaven we created. But if we didn't treat ourselves or our fellow human being with love, kindness, and compassion, that's the hell we created for ourselves in this world. And then what happens in the afterworld, behind the veil or in the spirit world, well, how you live and how you live your life here will determine where you go on behind the veil when the work is done, right? So, but for me, I don't celebrate. It's not that everything had its place in life for me, but I can't celebrate something that I don't live by, and that, right? So I live with this man that the world hasn't known as Jesus, but I've known Jesus as Yahshua, and that's what I spent 6 years in the wilderness getting to know who this being was, and that's so.
So what was the message you got when you were there? And particularly about, was there a message referring to the 25th as well?
Part of what Yahshua said to me in the wilderness was that every day is a sacred day. And if you think you can live in sin 6 days of the week and repent on the seventh day, then there will come a time when you cross over to the spirit world. When they told the people, Yahshua said, there will be those who think they know me, but they will not make it through. And that for me, when Yahshua said every day is a Sunday, every day is a Sabbath day, because we don't know when we're going to be going home to the Creator's spirit world, right? So, and I asked, well, why do the people live in sin 6 days a week and repent on the seventh day? And then Yahshua said, because there are those who think that because they're not prepared to give their life to me. They want to live in sin 6 days a week and repent on the seventh day because they're not prepared to give their life to me. And those are the ones who and 2023 is going to be, you can't live behind closed doors. You can't hide behind closed doors now, because the Creator knows your true intentions behind your intentions. The Creator knows your reaction before your reaction in life, right? So that's a part of it. So that was the multiple messages that Yahshua gave me, and that of how to be able to. And he said, I only spoke of 2 commandments. The first was to love God with your mind, your heart, and your soul. The second and final commandment I was telling the people was to love thy neighbor, because that takes care of all the other commandments, and that is love thy neighbor. But the world has forgotten the concept and power of love. And that then and Yahshua said to me, you don't have the authority to judge, condemn, and persecute yourself and your fellow human being. And that you are here to love each other, to be there for each other, and to be able to coexist with each other with love and light, right? So that was a part of it.
And I think this actually brings back a really important message. And of course it is, December 25 when we're airing this. And it's because it is Christmas, and Christmas really is a time where I think a lot of us, at least here in America and in the Western world, they really celebrate that. But the thing that's uniting us is, I think, the love, the peace, the belief in rebirth, and the stillness of that. That being said, I think it also is time to look at the things of what happened to get to this point. And what I mean is that, for example, the church, in many ways, during the Middle Ages particularly, I think a lot of the things that were negative for the planet, or a lot of the things that happened to this world, happened because we took God out of all of us, and out of the plants, and out of the stones, and out of the flowers, and kind of put it as a separate entity to come up with a story, and the Bible in an allegorical thing to put it on the side and kind of make it it's an external story, when the real Christmas story is a story that's written and anchored in all of us. And I think that's what's uniting across all of the faiths, across all of the beliefs, across all of the people, across all of the species. That's the universal law, the principle. What do you think?
I totally agree. I have social media platforms, and I did the social experiment on social media. I put a quote about, this is what God had said, and this is what God says, and I wanted to see what the reaction was on my social media about that, and there was zero reaction to it. I put the same quote up, but I took the word God out and I put creator in there. And it had a different reaction. People were reacting just because of that word, right? Unfortunately, it's sad where
because it has been hijacked, it has been
it,
taken out of everything
yeah,
that's living and
yeah,
put outside of the human,
yeah.
outside of the person as a separate entity, so that you would need a
Mm-hmm.
middleman to ever connect to actually to God, to the creator,
Mm-hmm.
to the
Mm-hmm.
source, which
Yeah.
in reality we're learning more and more that that is not the case.
Mm-hmm. No, because that's what Yahshua said. We don't have the authority to take another human being's life. You don't have the
Yeah.
authority to hurt your fellow human being. And that was what it was when people will say, you don't think all you got to say is Jesus' name and then you're saved. Just like the spiritual people, you can't just think, well, Creator bless and
Yeah.
not live and not live Creator's teachings, right?
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. It's just like there are spiritual people and there's our religious people, and they all have their role in life. There's good Christians, there's Christians that are lost. Just like there's good spiritual people, there are spiritual people that
Yeah.
are lost.
Yeah.
That's why Creator gave us free will, right? You can lie to Creator loved us enough to grant us free will. We are free to make choices, but we're not free from the consequences. You do good things will come. You do bad things will come. And people don't understand that you can lie to yourself, to your fellow human being, but you can't lie to the Creator. The Creator never sleeps, Spirit never sleeps. And that's why I'm always very mindful, because I know eternity is a long time to get it wrong. And I don't want to be doing that. So
yeah, actually, that is a very interesting thing, what you just said, the bad experience and the good experience. And some of it is also sort of reflected in our Santa Claus tradition generally for Christmas, when you know that if you've been a good kid, you get all the presents and the good things. And if you've been not behaving good, you get nothing, or things like that. But, you know, I did some research because my family originated more towards the east. And my grandmother had always the fly Augerian little mushroom on the Christmas tree, and I could, for the longest time when I inherited that Christmas set, I could not understand. I thought that must have been a mistake. Maybe it's like spring decoration that kind of got mixed in the Christmas decoration, until I began researching it. And it actually, there is a big tradition that's very much linked to the Santa Claus tradition that we now celebrate in the United States, with Santa Claus coming through the roof, the good and the bad experience. Because apparently, where this started, ancient shamans or priests in Siberia, they collected the Flyargarian mushroom. It's a psychedelic mushroom, and it looks like a Santa Claus costume. It's white, has a white stem. It's not so well known in America. A red hat and then white dots. And this used to be, it's in pagan beliefs, this has been celebrated by priestesses for a long time as manna, as the holy bread, but it had to be prepared in a certain way. So you had to collect it and then dry it for 3 months, which meant that very often the shaman, they would go and collect it in October and then dry it for 3 months. And on Christmas, around the winter solstice, he would go from house to house and give a sliced piece of the mushroom as a gift to the families to eat. And so if you had a good conscience, you would go on that because it was a psychedelic mushroom. You'd had a good experience. But if you had a bad conscience, you would have a bad trip. That's what generally referred to as a bad trip. And reindeer like this mushroom so much that they get high from it, which is where the flying reindeer come from. Which is really interesting when you look into this. Was like, oh wow, and it does make sense. And then I asked a friend of mine who is also from the East. She came from Hungary. And I told her the story, and she said, oh yeah, she said, my grandmother had those little mushrooms on the tree as well. So it's like, aha, that's where it came from.
Well, see, and that's the beautiful one. Thank you for bringing that up, Nicolette, because that mushroom is a spirit. It's a medicine. You honor it for really what it is. It'll honor you the same way. But here in Canada, they even legalized cannabis. And the elders had said when they legalized cannabis, that cannabis is a medicine, and it has to be honored for really what it is. But you legalize this medicine for recreational purposes, it's going to affect minds. And now people's mental health is deteriorating in Canada throughout the land, because you've broken spiritual law and traditional law when
Yeah.
you legalize that medicine for recreational purposes, and that's a part of it. What goes around comes around, and there's consequence for everything that we do, and
Yeah.
that's what's going on right now in the world, right? So.
Oh, totally. Now let's talk about 2023. So we talked a little, we covered a lot of traditions on Christmas. We talked about Native American traditions. We talked about winter solstice, which kind of is the key. We talked about birth and renewal. We covered a lot of spectrum. And of course, I think the uniting piece, and I do need to mention that also for our viewers at home, because it is the 25th of December, it is Christmas Day, and there is the message of love and peace and hope and blessings. So I think that's really important. I think it's also a time of really coming together and practice that and go within and practice that stillness. Now, with 2023 right on the doorstep, let's talk about, Gerald, 2023 is a special year. Why? What's expecting us?
Well, for us, that there have been a group of us who have been doing ceremony and doing what we need to do for that time. And something just happened to my screen here. Can you see me though?
No, we can see you, but we can't see the ceremony what you put on.
No, it's my screen just went down.
Oh, well, we can see you fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for what they're saying for 2023 is that the world is going to start correcting itself in 2023. And so for those of us who've been fighting the good fight, for those of us who've been walking towards the light and accepting this new world that's emerging as we speak, it's going to be abundance and prosperity, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, for those of us who've been fighting the good fight. For those who haven't been mindful, for those who've been resisting this new world that's emerging of love, light, unity, and healing, they are going to be unfortunately visited upon and see part of natural law that they don't want to see. And that because they've been given that opportunity up until this time in the last 7 years to be able to find that balance emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. For those of us who have done the work, the next 7 years is going to be a beautiful time. It's going to be a time of love, light, unity, and healing. And the healers have to heal to be able to, as the world wakes up in 2023, there's going to have to be all these healers from the four races of the human family with different modalities to be able to bring that balance when the people wake up so they can walk in balance emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, right? So.
Yeah, that's really understanding the human as a whole and not just as the physical. Like this really, what you keep mentioning all the time is really this, the four, which brings us back to the four bodies, the foundation, right? The square. But we need to talk about something, Gerald, because when we talk about the emerging new world, I think a lot of people get very easily nervous about what is meant by the emerging new world. Because we're getting bombarded with different stories. There's a hijacked story of telling us, you know, some people come up and say, oh, AI is the new world, and digitization is the new world, and robots is the new world, and chips in our head are the new world, and giving free checks, universal basic income is the new world, and all this stuff. And then you have the other people who are the traditional, who come more from the traditional side. When I mean traditional side, I mean in terms of honoring certain economic principles, in terms of honoring certain, which goes back to universal law. So I think there is many hijack the story of what's an emerging new world. So I want to clarify that, because to me, an emerging new world has beautiful potential. There's nothing fearful there. Talk to us how you see, what are key parameters of the emerging new world to you?
For me, the new world is honoring the gift that the Creator gave you, and that's free will. And using that free will to bring love, light, unity, and balance to the world for our children and their children's children. But because the world has not, their free will has been taken from them, and Creator did say that at this time, it's not going to be money that's going to save you. It's going to be your faith, your belief in your higher power is what's going to save you. And to be able to go back to reconnecting to your higher power and being there for your fellow human being. That's what the new world is. And that so now it made sense when Creator said those who haven't been mindful, those who have been selfish for their own selves and not being there for their fellow human being, they're going to see natural law like they've never seen it before. So they can come to understand, to reconnect to their higher power, to reconnect to their fellow human being. And that so for me, the new world is that's emerging is honoring the free will to live a good life, to earn a good death, so we can leave something behind for our children and their children's children. So it's just like honoring your free will for the right reason. And that, so to me, that's what I see the new world being.
I wholeheartedly agree. Let's clarify, though, the free will part, because that, too, I think, has the potential of getting hijacked and misunderstood in many ways when we talk about free will. What does free will, how is that seen by you and then also by Native American tradition or beliefs? What is that? How would you characterize that?
Yeah. Well, free will for me is when I look at when a situation is put in my path, and that if it's the good, the bad, or the ugly, and how I'm going to react to it. If I'm going to be there and be there for my fellow human being with whatever they're struggling with, without judgment, without condemnation, without persecution, and just be there for that fellow human being, then that's how I'm honoring my free will, by being there for that human being. And that, and not being there for myself, because I know the Creator knows my true intentions behind my intentions, my reaction before my action, and I understand that I don't look at the world and operate from ego, and the ego sits here in the mind. And where the 6 years in the wilderness, I was able to connect my mind to my heart, and that's understanding that their ego has a role in life. A healthy ego has a role in life. An unhealthy ego doesn't have a role in life, right? So for me, the free will is understanding there will be consequences. If I'm doing good things for my fellow human being, then I'm earning a good death for myself. If I do bad things and lie, deceive the people, then I am not going to earn a good death for myself. And there will be consequence for that, because I can lie to myself, to my fellow human being, but I can't lie to the Creator. And that's the thing for these people who are in these positions of power and leadership and abundance and prosperity and wealth. If they're not doing anything to make themselves a better human being, to make the world a better place, then it's going to affect your children and their children's children. And our children are on loan to us from Creator, right? So that's a part of it. Is be there and love thy neighbor. Yeah, Yahshua said. Just that's the new world. Love thy neighbor.
I think there's another component to it. It also says love thy neighbor as you love yourself, and that's the component that generally gets omitted, because you cannot love someone else unless you love yourself. There is a correlation to that.
Well, that's what of the 7 sacred laws of love: humility, honesty, courage, respect, wisdom, and truth. Love is the absolute teaching that Creator has, because in order for you to know love, to be love, you have to understand that the first one, that there's 3 that you're supposed to love in this world. The first being the Creator, and the second one that you are to love is yourself, because you can't know Creator without knowing love. And the third one you are to love in this world is your fellow human being. That's the first and absolute teaching of Creator's teaching. And because you can't say I love you and don't love yourself, then you're playing with that human being's life when you say that, right? So love is the new world. And that, right? So, and just like, unfortunately, there will be those who won't make it to the new world because they're not willing to make the change. They're not willing to sacrifice for their higher power.
Yeah, so when we talk about free will, that also has a big component of self-determination or self-responsibility in it, because you really have to take responsibility for everything you do, right? In terms of understanding that we create our own world, so whatever you create and comes back, there's no one else responsible for it other than yourself. And I think that's a hard topic for most of us to actually accept and to learn and to come to understand and to come to grips with. I think that's a really big struggle. So when we talk about this new emerging world, Gerald, where do governments come into all of this?
Well, this is what one of the prophecies they talked about. They said that at this time the churches would collapse, governments would collapse, the monetary system would collapse, and the the world would collapse at this time. So the new world would emerge, right? So, and that is why for us as for those leaders that are in government, that's why prior to European contact, these chiefs, these leaders we had in the community, they were told specifically to be very mindful of the choices they made because they spoke for the people. They weren't speaking for themselves. And whatever the people, and that any decisions that they made on behalf of the people was going to have either a good consequence or bad consequence. And that because we're there to speak for the people. So for the governments of the world, they need to understand you can't just take from the land, from the people, and expect them to give you love and light in return. And that so there is consequence for that, right? So that's a part of it. Is we have to learn to be there for each other and make sure that when we make a decision for the people as leaders, that we have to. That's why they say you have to be prepared to live with the consequences based on the choices you make. And that's
yeah, that's actually a very good ending. We're almost out of time, so I do want to use the last sentence here in summarizing a little bit. So you talked a little bit about the prophecies of Native American prophecies. Are those fairly similar? Is what people tell among each other, among Native Americans, are those fairly similar prophecies or beliefs, or is there a difference, a discrepancy, or different?
Well, a lot of these prophecies, Swagana, we all have them in our human family. Our white brothers and sisters call what they call druidry. Our yellow brothers and sisters have what they call shamanism. Our African brothers and sisters had what they call animism, and we as spiritual people call it spirituality, right? So all these prophecies are all connected to the natural world, to the natural laws, right? So so they're universal with our human family, and then for us as the Native Americans, and from our Hopi to our brothers and sisters in South America, as well to the plains, we all have prophecies that are very universal in a way of there's a time of light coming for humanity, and in order for the light to happen, the world will go through this chaos, confusion, this mayhem, and destruction to be able to remind the world they have forgotten their higher power and they have forgotten their fellow human being, and that's what 2023 is. The world is going to correct itself in 2023, and but like it'll be like natural law. What goes up, something must go down. And so for those of you, and I'll end this with this: if you can come to understand Creator's law, two of Creator's absolute laws, no human being has the right to play with another human being's life, and the second being no human being has the right to hurt another human being. And understanding natural law, what goes around comes around. What you put out there is what you will receive. And then the laws of nature. Understand those four sacred elements of earth, wind, water, and fire. If you don't honor those elements, one of them will become extinguished. You're not going to leave anything behind for your children. And spiritual law. The world is returning. Spirituality is returning back to the land, back to humanity. But there are those who are playing with the spirituality and talking about spirituality on social media, telling this is what you can do to do this and not good things, right? So understand spiritual law, and then when it comes to eternity, you'll be going to a good place.
That's a great ending. And we talked about the light and a message of light, of course, and this is the 25th of December. This is Christmas and the main season of the holidays for many people. And so on that note, really living the light, I think, is probably what we should all focus on, only on focusing on the light as we go into 2023. Gerald, thank you so much for coming on. Great to have you as always. Very much enjoyed the discussion and all the insights. And for you at home, I wish you a wonderful, wonderful 25th of December, no matter how you celebrate it, but do focus on the light, feel the warmth, focus on the light within you as well, and share it with the rest of your family and friends, and actually everyone out there that you can see. I think on that note, that would be a wonderful holiday gift for all of us out there. Have a wonderful evening. Good night. We won't see you next week for a live production because it's New Year's, but we'll back with new episodes on January 22nd. Have a good night.